Why are they sending him home and not finding any answers?
I was very nervous that her breakouts would...
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. Eddie Lee always thought clean living and a positive attitude would get him through anything, until mysterious hemorrhages began ravaging his body.
It wasn't a small amount of blood. It was as though someone had slashed a major artery. I was absolutely terrified. I was just terrified.
Then, when Linda Fox suddenly develops a disturbing skin condition, she's forced to face a bizarre disease that could kill her at any given moment.
I felt like somebody was suffocating me with a pillow.
She was in distress.
I thought that I was going to die.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. Ed Lee was not so fortunate.
In life, we don't necessarily get the hand we want, we get the hand we're dealt. And that's how I look at everything in life. This is the hand I was dealt, how am I going to cope?
A successful motivational speaker, Ed knew the importance of looking good and feeling confident in the public eye. But his outgoing persona and healthy lifestyle hid a private war that was slowly ravaging his body.
It was the spring of 1997, and I just noticed that I was going to the bathroom a lot. I occasionally had some mild abdominal pain, but it was just the frequent trips to the bathroom.
I noticed that Eddie wasn't working out quite as much. It seemed to be more of an effort for him. He just seemed to get a little fatigued more than he used to, which I took for he was working longer hours, traveling more.
Eddie spoke to me about some of his pain and discomfort, and it didn't seem like it was anything serious. Eddie was in great health and in great shape, and he was a young man.
But as time goes on, people start to notice odd changes in Eddie's behavior.
I was at family functions, at parties, and I would excuse myself a lot to go to the bathroom. And people were commenting on it, and I thought when it got to the point that people were commenting about it, I need to do something about it.
Edward sees his primary care physician, who offers a quick diagnosis for his symptoms: stress.
I know stress could cause a lot of things, but I know that I was not under a great deal of stress because I teach stress management programs, and I felt I had a pretty good idea of how to cope with stress.
His doctor prescribes over-the-counter stomach aids and advises him to take it easy. But Edward's symptoms persist.
He still would complain of stomach problems. This seemed more than what the doctor told him as stress.
A month later, May 1997, Edward returns to his family doctor, who is confident his symptoms aren't anything significant.
He said, well, why don't you come on down to the office and we could do a test called a sigmoidoscopy on you.
A sigmoidoscopy is a procedure where a doctor looks inside the rectum and the lower part of the colon through a lighted tube with a camera called a sigmoidoscope. The doctor may also collect samples of tissue or cells for closer examination.
When I was talking to my doctor about taking the sigmoidoscopy, he said, we're going to be examining the colon, and I thought, this is great, they could get an inside look.
The doctor said this will look to see if anything is going on, and we had our full trust that if anything serious was going on with him, this would find it, but this would rule anything out if it was something more serious.
It was not the most pleasant test. It wasn't horribly uncomfortable, but it wasn't pleasant.
During the procedure, the patient is awake, lying on one side, while the lighted tube is inserted into the rectum.
They also told me there would be some discomfort, which I did experience.
When the test results return, Eddie's colon looks completely normal.
My doctor looked at me and said, everything is clear. That validated what I had been thinking all along.
At that point, you do tend to have your trust in the doctors.
But as time goes on, Eddie begins to develop new symptoms.
He was getting worse. I noticed he was losing weight. He was losing his appetite more and more, just lying on the couch a lot, very fatigued.
Now I'm experiencing some nausea, some diarrhea, but it wasn't a major disruption of my life. It was a slight inconvenience is how I would describe it.
Though Eddie is convinced his new symptoms of nausea and diarrhea are manageable, at Beth's urging, he returns to the doctor.
He said, well, the sigmoidoscopy was clear. You could have something called irritable bowel syndrome. That could be an issue. A lot of people have it. It's very manageable.
There is no specific test for irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS. And because Eddie's sigmoidoscopy exam shows no problems, a diagnosis of IBS would cover Eddie's general symptoms of abdominal pain and diarrhea.
I wasn't very concerned with the diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome because I knew my sigmoidoscopy was clear.
And if it was something more serious, they would have found it. But yet, in the back of my mind, I did have concerns.
Eddie continues to live with the abdominal pain, thinking of it as a minor discomfort. But his wife notices it's starting to affect him.
He was having more severe stomach pains, I think more than he was telling all of us. And I saw it on a day-to-day basis. Something was not right.
Here I am, a young person. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I exercise, don't eat red meat. I knew there could be nothing seriously wrong with me.
In the fall of 2006, 42-year-old high school teacher Linda Fox and her husband Barry were celebrating almost 20 years together, and just as much in love as when they first met.
She's a wonderful person, and my greatest joy.
It was love at first sight. Barry was teaching math and I was teaching French. He's my best friend. I couldn't ask for a better life.
They have a great relationship. They're just a very active, happy couple.
We decided not to have children because we already have Eric, who's a wonderful stepson and son to Barry. And we have many friends and many children in our lives.
And in their suburban town of Perrysburg, Ohio, Linda was known for her inexhaustible energy.
I never had any health issues at all. I rarely was sick. I had recently become a runner and finished my black belt degree in karate.
And as Thanksgiving approaches that year, Linda is especially busy. Little does she know that her life is about to spin out of control.
One morning I woke up and both eyes were hurting. It felt like someone had taken hot peppers and rubbed them in both eyes. I looked in the mirror. I've got bright red stinging blisters on both eyelids. So I made an appointment and went in to see an eye doctor. And he looked very carefully at my eyes, and he said there's something called blepharitis.
Blepharitis is an inflammation of the eyelids caused by abnormalities in the oil glands. While the condition often recurs for unknown reasons, it can be treated.
The doctor gave me a prescription for a cream to put on my eye. I used the ointment on my eyelids for about a week, and my eyelids were fine. I thought I was just going to have to deal with it the best I could. And sure enough, it kept coming and going. It was as if somebody had punched me in the eye. I attempted to wear sunglasses to sort of hide.
But over the next 2 months, Linda is horrified to see that the strange inflammation is beginning to spread.
Not just my eyelids were swollen and red, my whole face was swollen. My face was really hot. I felt like I'd been exposed to the sun for way too long. I decided that I should go see a dermatologist. He wanted to do a biopsy of my eyelid because that is where things started, and he said, we need to do it right now. So he turned to his nurse and said, scalpel, please. And he actually cut into my eyelid and took a little piece of my eyelid and then sutured it.
She was nervous, but she was also hopeful that the doctors would find out something.
The dermatologist called me saying that it was dermatitis.
Dermatitis is a catch-all term for any inflammation of the skin, characterized by redness, swelling, and itchiness.
The doctor said there was no treatment for this. Barry and I were both really sure that this was not exactly a diagnosis.
Then, a week later, her condition suddenly takes a nosedive.
I had hives everywhere. It felt like I had ants crawling under my skin and that the ants were on fire. Hives are a very common reaction. as an allergy. I scheduled an appointment with an allergist. They tested for every substance that people normally react to. After they did the skin test, they came back in to read the results. I had not a single allergy, according to them. I was totally stunned. We had looked at everything we could possibly think of. I was back to square one.
Over the next 4 months, there's no escape from the relentless outbreaks. Overwhelmed by it all, Linda bravely gets through each one. Still, she has no idea what's about to hit her.
I woke up and I was totally on fire underneath my skin. Everything hurt, everything itched, everything was not right. I panicked. It was a very claustrophobic feeling. I was really struggling for breath. I felt like somebody was suffocating me with a pillow. I thought that I was going to die.
For a year, Edward Lee has suffered from constant abdominal cramping, nausea, and diarrhea. He takes over-the-counter medications to control his symptoms, but in August 1998, Edward's condition takes a turn for the worse.
It was in the evening, I was home, and suddenly I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I was expecting another instance of diarrhea, but I experienced something totally new, and this was very shocking to me. And it wasn't a small amount of blood. It was as though someone had slashed a major artery.
And he came rushing out of the washroom. I knew this was something to be alarmed about.
I called my family doctor after hours, and he said hemorrhoids could cause a lot of bleeding.
The doctor did not seem concerned at all.
He said if it would make you feel better, you could go to the emergency room.
The doctors admit Edward to the ER and keep him overnight for observation. While reviewing Edward's blood work, they make a surprising discovery. They diagnose him with a simple case of food poisoning.
What happened at that point, they put all their emphasis on the food poisoning and no longer did any follow-up work with the rectal bleeding.
In the back of my mind, I kept thinking I wish they would have done more tests with him at the ER.
Thinking they've solved his problem, the doctors send Edward home and tell him he should be feeling better within days.
But within the next few weeks, he started having stomach pains again.
2 months later, in October 1998, he begins bleeding again, and Eddie goes back to the doctor.
He once again explained that hemorrhoids could cause this type of bleeding. And at this point I said, well, at least I know what's going on now. I have hemorrhoids, and this is yet another manageable condition that I'm going to have to live with.
Hemorrhoids wouldn't cause stomach pains. They wouldn't cause the nausea he was experiencing. And I was beginning to get frustrated. Why are they sending him home and not finding any answers?
Just months later, in the middle of the night, Edward runs to the bathroom with abdominal pain. But this time, he's horrified by what happens next.
I experienced rectal bleeding. Once again, it was a significant blood loss, like someone had sliced an artery. The next thing I remember is waking up on the bathroom floor, and I realized I was completely covered in blood. It was like a scene from a grisly horror movie. I was just so stunned I couldn't move. And for a moment there I thought, maybe I'm still in a dream state. And then reality set in and I realized that this is real. I was absolutely terrified. I was just terrified.
Despite his weakened state, Eddie tries to clean up all traces of the blood to avoid scaring his wife. But that turns out to be impossible.
I saw bloody footprints all over our carpet. It looked like someone had been murdered in the house. I asked Eddie what happened. He told me he had passed out, and he didn't want me to be alarmed, so he cleaned the washroom floor, because that's something he didn't want me to wake up to and see.
The next morning, Edward calls his doctor about the fainting.
I told him that I had passed out and woke up on the bathroom floor covered in blood, and he said, well, as I've told you before, hemorrhoids could cause significant blood loss. And I said to him, but this was not only a lot of blood, I actually passed out. I had never passed out before. And he said, if you'd like, we could schedule another sigmoidoscopy.
The hemorrhoid diagnosis just did not make any sense. I just felt like he was being sent home with a simple diagnosis that did not seem to correlate with what was really going on. Yeah, I was getting scared at this point. It has to be something more serious. Why aren't the doctors helping us?
Over the last 6 months, Linda Fox has suffered from mysterious episodes of painful hives that seem to defy diagnosis. Now, she's been hit by her worst outbreak ever. She can't breathe, and her husband is rushing her to the nearest ER.
I could tell by the nurse's reaction that I was in trouble. And when the emergency room doctor came in, he told me that I was in anaphylactic shock.
Anaphylactic shock is an allergic reaction in which blood pressure drops and air passages become constricted. If not treated immediately, patients most often suffocate and die.
They gave me antihistamines and steroids. When they hooked me up, I felt like there's liquid ice going through me. It was such a huge relief. I was able to catch my breath again.
Once Linda is stabilized, the ER doctor performs a thorough exam and takes a detailed history.
I was diagnosed with idiopathic urticaria hives.
Idiopathic urticaria is the medical term for hives that recur but have no known cause.
We wanted to know what exactly our options were, how we could prevent this, how we could deal with it. The doctor was explaining that this was going to be something that I was going to have to live with. He gave me a prescription for oral steroids so that when I was going into anaphylactic shock, I could rely on that. I was scared. I was in tears. I was looking for some sort of answer and comfort, and this was not doing it for me.
What you're looking forward to is a lifetime of dealing with these symptoms. It's very frustrating because you never want to see a loved one with a problem that defied solving.
Turns out I was on the oral steroids much more than I wanted to be. I was ending up in anaphylactic shock every 2 weeks. Physically, I looked like I had been boxing and I lost a few rounds. I literally looked like a monster.
When you're swollen and red and reacting and teaching teenagers, well, teenagers notice everything.
I was very nervous that her breakouts were contagious.
Day in and day out, Linda is forced to endure the terrifying episodes and uncomfortable stares.
Emotionally, I was exhausted. I was not sleeping very well because I was still worried that I would go into anaphylactic shock. I was really struggling. I didn't see a way out. At this point, I'd been through so many things and so many tests that I thought for sure, if this happens again and I get the hives so badly that I go into anaphylactic shock, this is going to be the end. I can't imagine pulling through it again. I needed an answer. Barry and I decided to document everything that was happening.
Well, I'm kind of a spreadsheet geek. And so I made up sheets that covered a week, Monday through following Sunday.
When I was inflamed and red and swollen and itchy, I would just take a picture of myself, thinking when I go to the doctor, I'll be able to show him or her exactly what was happening.
She wrote down times, dates, amounts, everything she could think of.
After 2 months of journaling or so, we were sitting looking at my charts, and we saw that my symptoms were worse twice a month. From what we could tell, the pattern of the hives and everything, the whole reaction, stemmed from my menstrual cycle.
Certain that they're on to something, Linda schedules an appointment with her gynecologist, Dr. Frances Webb Smith.
When I first saw Linda, I was very shocked by her appearance. It was very clear that she was reacting to something quite serious.
I showed her my journals laid everything out.
I have to admit, I've never heard of a patient experiencing symptoms that correlated with her menstrual cycle like this before. My hunch was to give Linda extra hormones to see how her body would respond.
And she said, I have a patch that I could put onto you on your arm. And if that indeed is the problem, you should suffer a reaction.
Linda agrees to the experiment, knowing that any reaction to the patch will confirm Dr. Webb-Smith's hunch.
We decided that we would try this test on the weekend so that she would be able to be home with her husband.
I was scared, but I thought, well, if that's going to give me an answer, then I'll do it.
We also gave her steroids in the event that she had a severe reaction, that she could take something to treat herself right away.
I put the patch on in the afternoon, and I said to Barry, check on me, make sure I'm okay. I was really scared to go into anaphylactic shock. But at the same time, if that was going to prove to be the diagnosis, then it would be worth it.
Eddie Lee has suffered abdominal pains, nausea, diarrhea, and rectal bleeding for 2 years. After fainting on his bathroom floor from blood loss, Eddie's doctor suggests a second sigmoidoscopy, a test that will examine his lower colon.
I thought I just have a really bad case of hemorrhoids, even though my family members were much more concerned than I actually was.
People started noticing that Eddie just doesn't seem like Eddie. He just seems tired a lot. They noticed the weight loss. They noticed he was getting very pale.
In 1999, the Lee family switches to a new medical insurance plan, which does not cover visits to Eddie's current doctor, so his second sigmoidoscopy falls through the cracks. The Lees decide to start fresh with a new doctor on the new plan. But he doesn't realize he will see his new doctor sooner than he thinks.
I woke up and I experienced the most significant abdominal pain in my life. It was just excruciating.
It was the type of pain he could not get out of bed. He could barely stand.
And my first thought, I'm going to my big speakers convention in a few days. I never missed this convention, and I'm not going to miss it this year. I'm going to call my doctor.
Well, Mr. Eddie Lee came to my office as a result of making a same-day appointment. We had never met before.
And he examined my abdomen. I noticed one thing that was different than my other doctor visits is he spent a significant amount of time examining my abdomen. And I thought, wow, this doctor is very thorough, because most of the other doctors, it was very quick.
Well, typically at someone his age, with the degree of abdominal discomfort that he had, I would think of a enteritis, a gastroenteritis. However, he was having this bleeding.
Dr. Adams thinks Edward may be suffering from Crohn's disease, a disorder that causes inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. He orders a CBC, or complete blood count.
I was surprised he had not had a CBC before, considering the fact that he had complained of rectal bleeding for a fairly long period of time.
Eddie was telling him about the rectal bleeding, about the stomach pains. But at least the first time it felt like, okay, now a doctor is at least listening to my husband and not just sending him home.
I did go to that convention, and throughout most of the convention, I actually did feel very sick. I actually spent about half the convention in my hotel room. When I got back from my convention, within about an hour of being home, the phone rang, and it was my doctor's office. And I remember he said to me, "Are you experiencing any fatigue?" He said, "The reason I ask is because the blood work reveals that you're very anemic."
Eddie's blood test shows anemia, or a serious loss of red blood cells. Because anemia in a younger male could be a sign of a gastrointestinal tract disorder, Dr. Adams orders a new test for Eddie, called a colonoscopy.
A colonoscopy is the best test to look directly at the entire length of the colon.
I said, "I think I had that test done a couple years ago." He said, "No, it sounds like you had another test, which is a sigmoidoscopy."
A colonoscopy is a medical test that uses an endoscope, a thin, flexible instrument that has a light and lens or camera on its end, to view the inside of the large intestine. If abnormal areas are seen, the tissue can be removed and examined under a microscope to determine whether disease is present. Unlike a sigmoidoscopy, a colonoscopy travels the length of the whole colon. Eddie's colonoscopy is scheduled for the following day.
And I was beginning to feel maybe we're finally going to get some answers. This test might find what's really going on.
I went in for the colonoscopy and I was sedated, and I remember waking up from the procedure, and I remember my doctor standing next to me, and he said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but during the procedure, we found a mass."
Over the last year, Linda Fox has been suffering from hives so severe, they regularly send her into anaphylactic shock, nearly killing her. Now, her gynecologist thinks she may know what's behind the harrowing attacks. But to confirm her theory, she needs to trigger one more dangerous episode, this time with a hormone patch.
It was 10 or 15 minutes after she had put the patch on, and it was obvious to me immediately that she was in distress.
I was panicked because I was going into anaphylactic shock.
And at that point, it looked like we had a culprit.
Based on Linda's symptoms and her response to the patch test, Linda was diagnosed with autoimmune progesterone dermatitis.
Autoimmune progesterone dermatitis is a very rare allergic reaction to the hormone progesterone. In a healthy individual, proteins called histamines, concentrated in the face and throat, attack foreign substances the body identifies as dangerous. But in women like Linda, for some unknown reason, the body mistakes its own progesterone as a threat, and every time levels peak during the menstrual cycle, histamines are released, creating inflammation.
Once the production of progesterone gets into the bloodstream, it causes a histamine response. You're going to see in the skin hives and swelling. We're not sure why this manifested in Linda when it did. We don't know what causes this disease. More research needs to be done.
My diagnosis is that I'm allergic to my own hormones. I'm allergic to myself. I thought, this is crazy. You can't be allergic to something that's already in you, can you? And then I thought, well, looking back, it sort of makes sense.
It was extremely important that Linda and Barry documented her symptoms and her experience throughout this ordeal. It was clear that these symptoms were associated with her cycle. You could actually see the cyclic pattern of Linda's symptoms. It was occurring twice during the month.
The progesterone kicks up in your body at 2 different points in a woman's cycle, at ovulation and right before your period. So it was spiking in my body, as it does in everyone's body, but I was having an allergic reaction to it.
It's now clear that Linda's swollen eyelids were the first sign of the disorder setting in.
You see red eyes because that is where your histamines are most within the body, and the constant production of progesterone would eventually make the symptoms more severe. And the tissue responds by creating a hive. And you can see them throughout the body, on the chest, and the arms. With the severity of the symptoms, you could go into anaphylactic shock because you have inflammation now in the respiratory system.
Ultimately, if she hadn't been diagnosed, Linda could have easily suffocated.
Anaphylactic shock can kill. People have died from bee stings from allergic responses.
I don't think that there's any doubt that had I not had this diagnosis, I would be dead.
Thankful to be alive, Linda is now focused on what the future holds. Unfortunately, the only cure is a radical treatment, one that will shut down her production of progesterone for good.
I spoke with Linda and her husband at length about how I felt a total hysterectomy would be the permanent solution, as her ovaries were the producers of her hormones. I feel that having the hysterectomy was the only option for Linda not to ever experience the symptoms that she had again.
It was either I have the operation and I continue to live a normal life, or I end up twice a month not being able to breathe. So for me, the decision was obvious.
It ended up being a very easy decision because the end result was that she was going to be healthy and able to get back to her normal self.
I had the hysterectomy in July of 2008. Within, I would say, a week after the surgery, I was much different. For the first time since I had been having these reactions, I was symptom-free, and my skin was a normal color, and I was not getting swollen up. It was amazing.
After struggling to live with the debilitating condition, it's a great relief to finally have it under control. And now, Linda can't help but wonder why it took so long to get a solid diagnosis.
Very little is known about this disease. We were able to find maybe 2 or 3 articles that had been written about this.
It's extremely rare. As a matter of fact, I think there are fewer than 50 cases that have ever been diagnosed.
I highly doubt that I'll see another patient with this diagnosis.
Eddie Lee has just had a colonoscopy to find out what has been causing 2 years of abdominal pains, nausea, diarrhea, and rectal bleeding. Eddie examines the test imaging with his doctor.
And he showed me the picture. And he said, we took a sample for a biopsy. We'll get the results back in a few days, but we are quite certain that you have colon cancer.
Eddie's family is stunned by the cancer diagnosis.
I couldn't believe what he was telling me.
The first thing that went across my mind, I'm going to lose my husband.
You start thinking mortality and death, and I didn't want to lose my brother.
It's something you don't want to hear.
After he mentioned the word colon cancer, nothing else seemed to register. I was just in that shock of hearing that word cancer.
And then I felt I should have been with Eddie. Again, I felt like I let him down. At least holding his hands and when he got the diagnosis.
Eddie is scheduled for surgery to remove the cancerous mass. The night before the operation, Eddie and Beth share what they realize might be their last moment together.
Eddie told me, I just need to tell you I love you. He said, because I know you don't always come out of surgery. I said, no, don't even say that. You're going to make it.
You know, when I talked to Beth, there was, lots of tears, and it was, very emotional. And I knew that, I might not make it, but I told Beth, I'll give it my all. Now you got me all emotional here.
Eddie decides that a positive attitude is the only way to get through the ordeal.
I remember going in for the surgery, and I was in this I can cope mode. I felt like I needed to be strong for everyone.
He went into surgery, and he brought a clown nose.
So I had my little red clown nose on, and I remember they were preparing me for surgery. I told everyone stop for a moment, and they all turned around, and I said, is everyone here in a good mood? And they said, yes. And I said, okay, you may proceed, because the last thing I would want is a bunch of grumpy people operating on me.
What the surgeon does in the operating room is to open up the abdomen and to isolate the colon and remove that segment of tumor, as well as what we call lymph nodes. These are glands inside of our body that drain fluid. It's very important to remove these lymph nodes to tell you how extensive this cancer has developed.
The wait for the surgery was, again, it was like one of the longest waits. Just hoping the surgery goes okay. I just didn't want them to do the surgery and find a huge mass that had already spread all over. That was my biggest concern.
In a 4-hour operation, doctors remove a tumor the size of a grapefruit, 12 inches of colon, and 17 lymph nodes. But there's still one more step to be done.
While the surgeon may be able to make a preliminary diagnosis, it's really going to be the pathologist who is going to really do the final designation of what we call staging.
The last day of my hospital visit, the surgeon walked in and he said, we have the results of the pathology report, and he told me that you have stage 3.
In stage 3 colon cancer, the growth, or tumor, has penetrated the bowel wall and invaded the surrounding lymph nodes. And there is the danger. The cancer will spread into the abdominal cavity. Colon cancer is the 3rd most common form of cancer in the United States.
Stage 3 colon cancer patients generally have about a 60% 5-year survival.
Eddie's stage 3 colon cancer diagnosis requires mandatory chemotherapy follow-up treatment. A grueling chemotherapy regimen with 2 different drugs tests Eddie's capacity to maintain his positive attitude.
The chemo, that was intense. It was hard seeing him, I think, even more sick during the chemo than when he actually had the cancer.
One question lingers in the back of Eddie's mind. Why had his previous doctor misdiagnosed him for so long?
In terms of my healthcare professionals, they were probably thinking, well, this is a young guy. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he exercises, doesn't eat red meat. It's highly unlikely at his age he would have something serious like colon cancer.
Eddie's colon cancer was in the right side of the colon, an area we call the cecum. And that's an area of the colon that can contain a lot of tumor without a patient having any symptoms for a very, very long period of time.
Even if Eddie had received a second sigmoidoscopy test, the only colon exam he was given, it would have been worthless. A sigmoidoscopy can only let doctors see the first half or left side of the colon. Since Eddie's cancer had been on the right side, the tumor went undetected. If Eddie's tumor had progressed to stage 4 cancer, his 5-year survival rate could have plummeted to under 10%.
I was angry at my first doctor for not telling me that I was having a partial test. It would almost be like someone going in for a mammogram and only having one breast examined.
Now I have to have the surgery, and I'm going to have chemo, then I'm going to have this, and then I'm going to have that, and that's how I look at everything in life. Inch by inch, life is a cinch. Yard by yard, life is hard. And this is how I look at everything. We move.
Now 5 years cancer-free, Eddie combines his experience as a colon cancer survivor with his motivational speaking career, giving speeches about health advocacy.
We need to take charge of our health care. This doesn't mean going in and bossing our doctors around. What this means is no matter what illness we're dealing with, whether it's cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, we need to know what's going on. Okay.
For the pasta sandwich?
Yes.
When a patient has a complaint and it's persistent, no matter what the statistics may show, that's where the art of medicine comes in. And so I think the key here is listening to the patient.
Today, Eddie, Beth, and their family of pugs live life one day at a time.
Today, Linda is symptom-free and back to her old self.
Now that I'm healthy again, since my surgery, I am feeling 100% better. I have my energy back. I don't have to worry anymore. This diagnosis has made me realize you're the one who knows your body the best. You have to pay very close attention to what's going on with your body. Write down what's happening to you. Explain it in full to the doctor and work with the doctor.
Her due diligence really paid off. It was her perseverance that really get to the answer.
Linda's doing great now. She's back to her old self. Lots of energy.
My life is fantastic today.
My wife Linda is a truly remarkable human being. I'm a very lucky man simply because at some point she decided that she was going to spend her life with me.